Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Caleb Franz back to the program. Caleb, it has been a while, but you'll be a familiar voice for some folks. For those meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, it's good to talk to you, as always again, Brian. So I'm the program manager at Young Voices. I help a lot of our new writers as well as some of the more seasoned writers kind of get their start into the space that they're trying to occupy, whether that be writing and journalism or in policy work, or even in some cases in academia. And then I'm also a historian of sorts, a historical writer. I write, I've written rather a book on the Reverend John Rankin. It's a biography on the man who is known as the father of abolitionism, and various other pieces, including this one that we're about to talk here today.
Yeah, and I would, you're being modest, but I won't be nearly that modest for you. Caleb is a fantastic historian. And what we're going to talk about today is as America's 250th anniversary approaches, we are definitely seeing some competing versions of history. And I'm thinking back to the bicentennial back when I was a kid. That was a very consuming event. The Freedom Train traveled from one end of America to the other. We did all kinds of stuff in school, to commemorate the bicentennial, and it really felt like it was like there was something special being celebrated. I'm hearing a lot more conflicting points of view with this 250th anniversary. Why is it? Why do we have these competing worldviews?
I open the piece talking about this sense of identity crisis that the United States seems to be going through, and I think it's quite critical that we identify this and that we address it as quickly as possible because it could very well be detrimental to the next 250 years that we're facing as a nation. Over the past several decades, especially in academia and in culture, Hollywood and the press and all sorts of things. There has been this, especially I would say, since the last big celebration back in 1976. There has been this slow but sure revisionism of American history that we've seen, where it is this very black and white view of you're either the oppressor or you're the oppressed. And this is very harmful because not only does it paint a very negative picture for the United States as it is today, it also paints, I think, a very wrong picture of the way that the United States came up and the ideas that inspired. And of course, there were dark periods in American history. I'll be the first one to tell you that. And anyone who says otherwise is really missing the point on their end as well. But the dark periods of American history, those aren't the periods that define us as a people. It's what we did to overcome those periods and the steps that we took and the ideas that inspired those steps. In my opinion, that is what really defines us as a nation.
No, I'm with you there. And you mentioned in the article, some of the outrage that President Trump sparked when he was talking about the Smithsonian Institute and the way that their exhibits were written to reflect what I would think is it could be considered a more woke point of view. I've heard this from people who've traveled to some of the places like Monticello or even Mount Vernon. The docents at those sites tend to be much more focused on. And this is where the slaves were kept and so forth, which is part of the story, but it now
Yep.
has kind of been shifted to where it's become the focus of the story, which to
Yep.
me seems like an inaccurate telling as well.
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily think that the instinct of the president or certain members of the administration is wrong in the sense that this is a problem, because it certainly is. Where I think they really mishandled this is that they seem to have this attitude that anything in reference to slavery or anything referencing the negative aspects of America's past is sort of giving credit or giving credence to this idea of like the irredeemable nation, which of course I don't subscribe to. But I think that the president really misses the mark, especially whenever he says, I don't know why everyone's, in so many words, I don't know why everyone's talking about how bad slavery was. It is something that we should talk about. In part because of the inspiring nature of how it was able to overcome. The abolitionists that I wrote about in my book and in a lot of my writings, they looked to the founding and they looked to the Declaration of Independence and they looked to the intent of the Constitution and what a lot of those figures were trying to do, particularly with the issue of slavery itself. So that is something that I think should be highlighted and emphasized, and not try to shy away from something like that.
No, I'm with you. I think we need to learn from the good as well as the bad, but I without defending, the president and others who take that very rigid stance, it does feel like they're giving up ground in some ways to an ideology that, as you mentioned earlier, is based on the oppressors versus the oppressed, which is a lot. That sounds like classic left wing agitation, and heaven knows we've seen enough of that. Streets renamed, schools renamed, statues torn down. Where is the sweet spot where we can acknowledge what actually happened, and learn from it, but we're not tempted to either make saints or demons out of the people who lived that history.
One of my heroes and inspirations for a lot of my writing is David McCullough, who died in 2020 or 2022. Yeah. And he was someone who would always lead with the person and lead with the humanity of the character that he was always telling. He would always talk about how history is human, and when in the course of human events, and the key word there is human. And I think that whenever we look at history from the standpoint not of gods and myths, gods in a sort of classical sense, in myths and all of these kind of things, but rather as people, as they were, and people are flawed, but flawed people can also do some pretty great things. And that is these are the people who laid the groundwork, and that shouldn't be ignored for the world that we live in today. And I think looking at things from that perspective is the right way of going about this. And it's really going to be the only way that we can have some semblance of a win over these raging history wars that we have going on.
Well, and there's also the problem of, in the case of slavery, I'm not suggesting people shy away from acknowledging it, but at a certain point, it seems like we have to admit that was a problem that was solved by different people in a different time. Otherwise, it just becomes a source of endless guilt that can be leveraged by people
Right.
who are seeking some advantage.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously, it's not just historical revisionism. There is kind of like a modern political agenda at the end of this that is trying to be achieved, and that's part of the problem. You look at things like the 1619 Project, for example, and the intent there, and they talk in depth about the problems with capitalism and all of these things that go into it. And the unspoken kind of tie-in is that the things that the founders believed, who were these evil slaveholders, are also the things that a lot of conservatives or libertarians believe made this country so great in the first place. If we want to keep defending those things that we believe in, we need to set the record straight on the historical record.
I think you make the case very well in the article. There are plenty of reasons to be proud of being an American, but right now, pride and patriotism seems to be at kind of an interesting low. That's maybe a topic for the next time we visit. Again, we're
Yes,
talking with
absolutely.
Caleb Franz. Caleb, where can people find your work? Where can they find your book? Where can they follow what you do?
Yeah, so I'm on X occasionally, not as much as I used to be, but that's at Caleb Franz. And then the book, you can find in bookstores such as Barnes and Noble or on Amazon.com. It's called The Conductor.
Fantastic to hear from you, as always. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Good to talk, Brian.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome Mike Fox back to the program. Mike, great to have you here. For those meeting you for the first time, take a moment here. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, Brian, good to be with you. Thanks for having me. So my name is Mike Fox. I am a legal fellow with the Cato Institute's Project on Criminal Justice. And in that area, we focus heavily on certain practice areas, which is overcriminalization, self-defeating policing, the role of criminal juries in resisting oppression, coercive plea bargaining, and due process. And I'd say the last two are very on point for the discussion we're about to have.
Yeah, watching the Trump administration get to work on immigration enforcement, I know that motivated a lot of people in their vote last year, but at the same time, there have been some pretty disturbing trends for people who are paying attention. It's not as neat and simple as, well, we just get the people who aren't supposed to be here and we send them back to their countries. Nowhere is that more true than in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. For those who are not familiar with his name, bring us up to speed. Who is this individual? Why has he garnered so much attention in terms of the immigration debate?
Yeah, so earlier in the year, the government basically kidnapped Mr. Abrego Garcia, sent him to CCOT, which is a notoriously violent prison in El Salvador, despite the fact that a immigration judge basically said the only place he can't go is El Salvador because he has credible fear there. They sent him there. He ultimately got brought back to the United States. As soon as he got brought back, he was prosecuted on human trafficking charges in Tennessee, in I believe the Middle District of Tennessee. But what I find sort of striking about that is that case was from 3 years ago. If it was a really serious case, why in the world did the government not prosecute it in 2022? Why did they wait up until Mr. Abrego Garcia was fighting his unlawful extradition to bring the charge? It seems awfully convenient, and it sort of undermines the idea that these charges were so serious and how dangerous Mr. Abrego Garcia is, because you would think if they knew who he was and he was really engaged in such heinous conduct, why not just prosecute him then?
Could this be chalked up to differences between the Biden administration and the Trump administration?
I mean, sure, it could be, but I doubt it. I mean, these are, human trafficking is not typically what you would think of as like a Republican Democrat, down the middle thing there. I think most Americans of all political stripes want people who are actually engaged in human trafficking prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The issue here is whether or not that was actually happening.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make excuses for immigration enforcers here, but it does seem like under the Biden administration, immigration law was weaponized to the extent that there were a lot of people brought into the country who really shouldn't have been here or plausibly could have been denied entry. And what I see is a snapback on the part of the Trump administration to address what I think is a real problem that needs to be addressed. But I'm going to put it out there. Maybe they're doing it. They're way too heavy-handed in how they're going about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think majority of Americans wanted President Trump to secure the border, but securing the border versus going in and terrorizing tens of millions of people who didn't actually break the law beyond coming in here illegally. In fact, many of them actually didn't come in illegally. Some of them are, here lawfully, and some have even been U.S. citizens. There's actually numerous cases, ongoing litigation surrounding U.S. citizens who've been unlawfully stopped by immigration enforcement.
Talk to me about what would a fair trial or real due process look like if this was being handled with a careful eye towards observing due process. What would they be doing different in terms of how they're addressing immigration law today?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on immigration law. I would say, what we want to be doing, or at least what I think most people want the government to do, is to go after people who are actually a danger to the community, violent offenders, and deport them. What they don't want people doing, by and large, is finding people and going after them because they speak Spanish, or they hang out outside Home Depots, or they engage in day labor or employment occupation that is commonly used by people who may not have lawful status in the country. Or perhaps worst of all is, the color of their skin, race, ethnicity, national origin. These are all what we call immutable characteristics. And what we've seen from a lot of these immigration enforcement tactics is that the government has exempted large swaths of the population from Fourth Amendment protections on account of their race, gender, and national origin. And the Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. And I think it's unequivocally clear that stopping someone because they look like they might be from South America is an unreasonable seizure. The problem now is that the government has said, well, sure, that alone is unreasonable. But if they're also outside of Home Depot, then you add that and then it's fine, which of course is ridiculous. But that's where we are right now.
Well, and I think you would agree those shortcuts, while, on the one hand, people may, well, they're being aimed at, those who aren't supposed to be here. If they can do it to them, if corners can be cut, then it can be done to you. And I don't know about you, but I care about due process. I care about those things being, I want a fair trial if for some reason I'm brought before the state. Talk to me about pretrial detention. You mentioned in your article that's one of the most powerful weapons used in gaining plea bargains from people in federal custody. How does that work?
Yeah, Brian, that's absolutely right. So now about 75% of individuals who are charged with a federal crime are detained pretrial. That means they're locked in jail, right? And that is problematic for a number of reasons. One is we have this thing called the presumption of innocence. Up until 1987, when the Supreme Court decided a case called the United States versus Salerno, the Constitution, the Eighth Amendment, right against excessive bail, actually meant something, and people would typically be home. That allowed the government to just allege someone's dangerous and lock them up. And I can give you examples of how this is problematic. When I was a public defender, I would have clients who the government would offer a plea deal that would let them walk home that very day, while simultaneously arguing that they're dangerous and need to be held pre-trial. I don't understand how my client could both be totally safe to be in the community, provided they waive their constitutional right to a jury trial, but if they decide to assert it, then they're dangerous and need to be jailed. That's obviously not true. What it is that the government understands that it's very difficult to assist in your own defense behind bars. People want to watch their kids grow up. They need to, pay their rent, pay their mortgage. They need to be able to engage in their occupation and do things like that. And they understand that people will plead even to things that they're innocent of or things that can't be proven, just so that they can go home.
So we've got a couple minutes left here. Let's talk about what needs to happen to make sure that our confidence in federal prosecutors isn't being undermined by the way they're going about their work right now.
Yeah, so the Constitution has a mechanism by which we adjudicate criminal cases. It's called the jury trial. Now, jury trials have been increasingly rare. 98.7% of federal criminal convictions come from guilty pleas. There's really two main reasons for that. One is coercive plea bargaining, which I mentioned before, comes from pretrial detention, mandatory minimums, charge stacking, the ability to threaten to indict family members, now apparently the ability to threaten to deport people to third world countries. The other, though, is that jury trials have become less valuable. Historically, the role of a jury wasn't just to decide guilt, but it was to decide, is this something that the community thinks should be a crime? Should it be a crime here? And if so, is the penalty proportionate to the crime? So I'll just give you a quick example. By and large, I don't know anyone who doesn't think human trafficking should be a crime, but I also don't know anyone who thinks leaving water out for migrants in the Arizona desert is human trafficking. Apparently, a jury agreed with me because they acquitted a man in the last Trump administration who was charged with human trafficking for leaving food and water out in the scorched Arizona desert for migrants.
Yep. Thank goodness for the jury. I mean, that's the last bulwark against tyranny. There's obviously a lot of reform that has to take place. We've got 30 seconds or so. Where does it begin? What's the first step?
I mean, judges, federal judges, also state judges have an obligation. Oftentimes they just rubber stamp plea deals. They don't have to do that, right? They can say no and they can send a case to trial and let a jury decide. Of course, though, there is the incentive that defendants have to plead guilty to avoid mandatory minimums. And sometimes even if the judge feels the mandatory minimum is unjust, the law is the law. If they have to give you 40 years, they have no choice.
Again, we're talking with Mike Fox. He is a legal fellow at the Cato Institute's Project on Criminal Justice and also a Young Voices contributor. Mike, where can people follow your work?
Yeah, they can follow me at Twitter at, oh my God, what is my Twitter feed? I think it's FoxMike90 or FoxMike. I can find it. They can follow me on Twitter or just visit cato.org, find my my page, and my Twitter feed is there.
Welcome back. This is our final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Sofia Hamilton back to the program. Sofia, for those meeting you for the first time, take a moment. Tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me again, Brian. I'm always happy to join the show. My name is Sofia Hamilton. I'm based in the DC area, but I'm originally from Florida. So I have very interesting views there. And I am a healthcare policy analyst in my day job. And then in my free time, I work with Young Voices as a harm reduction fellow, where I focus on all different types of drug policy issues, but I really specialize in the tobacco and nicotine space.
And boy, is that's a really relevant place to be. I during the COVID pandemic, I spent a little bit of time actually working behind the counter of a convenience store and got schooled on stuff that I had no idea had transpired in the years since, we were teenagers and somebody would buy a pack of cigarettes and all the alternatives to tobacco. Nicotine really blew me away. But I'm looking at an article you've written for Reason about how the original Zyn nicotine pouches, the FDA has inadvertently made it easier for knockoffs to come in, fake nicotine pouches to come in and flood the US market. Talk to me about, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Oh, it's definitely a bad thing because with these knockoffs, you have absolutely no idea what's in those pouches. And so the actual Zyn nicotine pouches, I'm a big fan. They're great products and they're a great harm reduction tool. So they are the one of the least harmful products that you can use that has nicotine, that isn't for quitting. Like patches, like nicotine patches, those are categorized differently. But the pouches that you put in your mouth, like Zyn, when you compare those to vapes and to into traditional cigarettes, they're a lot less risky. There's really no cancer risk with them because you're not having that combustion and you're not smoking anything. So those are great products, but we're seeing all of these fakes come in because of the FDA. And we saw the same phenomenon with vapes, where the FDA fails to act to regulate how they should to get safe and popular products on the market. When they leave that opening for the safe products, the black and the gray market is going to fill in with their unregulated products because they know that consumers want those. They know that consumers want vapes and that they want nicotine pouches. And when they want those products, they want them in higher nicotine percentages and they want them in flavors. And the FDA isn't allowing that on the market. And so the illicit market is coming in and taking over that market share all while consumers aren't aware what's going on. So it's a really scary thing that's going on. And I think it's even scarier that consumers don't know that they're getting counterfeit products.
Sophia, tell me, does this mean then that some of these knockoff brands are coming into convenience stores, gas stations, and so forth without FDA approval? In other words, is it legal to sell them even without being an FDA approved product, or do they just find their way in?
It's a legal gray area. It's kind of similar to how we've like treated recreational marijuana. It's not to the same extent, but it's not regulated by the FDA. So Zyn has been on the market for about a decade in the United States. They were selling legally, but it wasn't until this January actually that they received approval from the FDA to market to U.S. adult consumers. So that's like the first stamp in the approval process of the FDA, the whole regulatory scheme there. And so you can sell legally before then, but the counterfeit products are no way legal because they are misrepresenting an established brand that consumers know and trust. And you really can't tell that these are fakes unless you have that knowledge of the FDA approval process, like I do, and most Americans don't, or you have that deep brand recognition. And so I realized that this was a problem when I went to the convenience store that's a 10 minute walk from my house. Not even 10 minutes, like 10 feet really. And I walked in and I saw all of these flavors that I knew weren't on the international market. These weren't just flavors that were being imported over that aren't legal on the US market. Because if you're not aware, the only Zins that are allowed on the US market are unflavored, mint varieties, coffee, or citrus. Um,
Wow.
very, very limited. And you'll go into any convenience store and you'll see fruity flavors. You'll see, oh gosh, there's a whole host of them. Spicy mango. I saw guac shake zins, and I knew that's not a flavor on the international market. I don't even know what that flavor is. And so that can't be real. That can't be real. And that's what really spurred me to write this, because they're not even good fakes anymore. They're getting so outrageous, and it's really scary because you have no clue what you're consuming, and you think that you're getting this product because it's less risky and it's the safer alternative, and you're making a really dangerous choice without knowing.
You make an interesting point too in the article that the FDA has actually made it harder to get safer alternative products on the market, and because of that, they've opened the door for the illicit market to provide and meet a need that people have. So not to have you tell the FDA what to do, but Sophia, what do they need? What do they need to do? What should shift in terms of how they approach the approval process?
Well, I can tell you, Brian, there's tens of thousands, probably even more applications that they have not gone through when it comes to vapes and nicotine pouches. There are so many good companies that want to come and sell to American consumers in a regulated and safe and legal manner that the FDA is stopping. And so there's so many different pathways to go through the FDA, and I won't get into it because it's very wonky. Um, but they really do need to expedite it and get those good flavors that people really want onto the market. They do need to clamp down on these counterfeits, but they can't just do that. We've been seeing the FDA do that with vapes. They've been having these very big high profile raids where they're going in and taking tens of thousands of counterfeit vapes, and yeah, those shouldn't be on the market, but they're ignoring the signal that consumers are showing to them that they want these flavored products, that they want these options, and they want this choice, and they're not giving it to them. And so when they keep blocking that choice from consumers, the gray market, the illicit market, the black market is going to keep coming in with those fake and illicit and counterfeit products time and time again. And so they really do just need to have a better approval process, of a faster approval process, to allow those good products to come on the market.
I know that occasionally I talk with some of your Young Voices colleagues from the UK, and I understand that this is an issue there as well. There are people who do not want to see any even safer alternatives. If the FDA were to improve its approval process, would that have a trickle up effect or a trickle out effect to the other regulatory agencies around the world that likewise look at these products?
I think it could be helpful. I mean, we see a similar thing in the United States where when one state does something bad, it goes onto the national field eventually. And it's so frustrating. It's always Massachusetts and California giving us the worst nicotine laws that we then take at the federal national stage. And so I think we could really be a great source for the UK and for other countries to follow. But I will say most other countries have much better nicotine and tobacco laws than us. You need to look at Sweden, where Zyn, the nicotine pouches, originated, and they really understand harm reduction policies. They understand that you need to give people, consumers, adult consumers, a safer alternative to what they want, a safer and effective and popular alternative, because prohibition doesn't work. We know that in the United States, and we keep trying it time and time again. And it's time that we recognize on the US level and at the international stage that adults are going to do what they want, and we need to give them safe alternatives.
Again, we are talking with Sofia Hamilton. She's a policy analyst in DC and a harm reduction fellow with Young Voices. Where can people find you on social media?
You can follow me and all of my work on Twitter at Sophie Hamilton.